7th President Supply.
Exercise our nation.
I tendered my resignation last night.
Our time is now.
Remember 5 years ago? Wow, the time has really gone by quickly.
Hello, I'm Gil Eastman.
And I'm Mary Lou Novitsky. Welcome to the special edition of Deaf Mosaic.
Human rights, civil rights, and even student rights are subjects taught and discussed at institutions of higher education. It is in school where we learn the power of communication, the power of collective reasoning, and the power to reform and renew.
5 years ago, here at Gallaudet University, the student body taught the world what they had learned about civil rights and cohesive action when they shut down the campus in a peaceful protest against the Board of Trustees' decision to appoint yet another hearing president of Gallaudet. In the university's 124-year history, no deaf man or woman had ever been given the opportunity to lead this academy. The protest was labeled Deaf President Now, DPN.
The week was March 6th to 13th, 1988, and DPN's impact reached far beyond the boundaries of this campus, far beyond the boundaries of this country. Please join Deaf Mosaic as we celebrate DPN's 5th anniversary and present an exclusive look at its power and its promise.
Wow. 5 years disappeared. The DPN was significant, maybe the most important and most significant thing ever to happen in the deaf community. Really, it changed the way deaf people think about themselves, ourselves, and the way hearing people look at us. That really started as a student movement. It really was a protest period. Students decided they had enough, that they heard, not yet, you're not ready yet, and they decided that's enough and protested. But very shortly, it changed from a student protest to a social movement. It involved many, many people inside Gallaudet, friends of Gallaudet, outside Gallaudet who knew nothing about Gallaudet before, became very involved in that movement.
I had been the student body government president and on the search committee for Gallaudet's next president. I was involved. During that time, I saw some members of the Board of Trustees and some people on the search committee expressed doubts that there could be a deaf president. I didn't like what I saw at all, and I had this angry feeling inside of me. Now, until Sunday night, I wasn't involved in the protest. I mean, I actively participated, but I didn't have any leadership role or anything like that until Tuesday. At that time, it was suggested that 4 leaders be selected. There was a lot of confusion, so 4 leaders were suggested, including Greg Leibach as spokesman, and Jerry Covell and Brigitta Bourne. They had been heavily involved with the student activities, like the SBG, so that made sense. We agreed to it, so that's how I got involved.
If something like this had happened before, there wouldn't be a memory. But this was the first protest, at least that I've ever heard of, within the deaf community. It's an important part of my life. It's hard for me to answer why. The only thing I can say is that it was my beliefs. My belief said, do it. My belief said we should show the Board of Trustees at that time that they were wrong, and the rest just happened naturally from the turmoil that resulted from their misjudgment. The rest just happened unexpectedly because of their wrongdoing. So I believed that they were wrong, and someone had to stand up, and I was willing to do so. At the time, I was already known as a person who likes to get things all stirred up, a real troublemaker. People knew that that was just my way. Sometimes I think that the board members are the ones who gave me this responsibility, but also I acted upon it. So it's hard to answer how and why I got involved.
We were all government majors, and our teacher, Dr. Malzkuhn, had taught us about the various civil rights movements, and we often discussed why deaf people never protested for their rights. Sometime before DPN actually started, we talked about it as a possible civil rights movement. Maybe it would be, but we didn't know that at the time. It wasn't clear. Before the protest, I thought that it was important that the most qualified individual, regardless of whether they were deaf or hearing, be selected as the president. I thought that was best for the university. That was until just before the protest and the rally. I got involved because my boyfriend, he is my husband now, but he was my boyfriend at the time, said to me, "Where is your deaf pride?" And I knew he was right, so I became more involved.
During the protest, the highlight was Nightline, the night that I was interviewed by Ted Koppel. I think that was the best time of my life because I had the chance to have nationwide exposure and attention.
News Nightline. Reporting from Washington.
Yes.
Excuse me, I would like to make one clarification here. The Board of Trustees has invited Dr. Zinsser to take her place as the university president, but there is no support on the campus for that, and we have not accepted her and recognized her as the president of Gallaudet University.
No, I understand, but...
As president of the student body government, of course, I represented the students. So when the protest got underway, I became a leader along with the other student representatives for DPN. I was very glad to have had the opportunity to be a leader during that time. Looking back, it's a wonderful memory. What made it possible was all the students and me being there and working together. It was a good match.
The Gallaudet protest was a catalyst for change, sparking increased awareness of the abilities of deaf people and development of new programs and technologies to effectively communicate between those who can hear and those who cannot. The world was watching and listening, eager to participate in this revolution.
More sponsors volunteered to fund caption television programs, statewide telephone relay services began, and demand for American Sign Language courses grew nationwide. Even deaf Mosaic's viewing audience grew larger, thirsty for insight into deaf culture and the deaf community. And deaf people found doors opening for them that had previously been locked. Most notably in the deaf community was the unlocking of doors to administrative positions in deaf education.
The number of deaf superintendents of schools for the deaf has risen dramatically. I've lost count now. I think there have been 17 since DPN. It's funny that people here call me the first deaf superintendent. While that may be true, I call myself the first consumer superintendent. I'm the first person to have gone through the system and to have become superintendent here.
Remember that prior to DPN, there were already a few deaf superintendents, but they were all men. I see this not so much as a deaf issue, but more of a woman's issue. No deaf woman had taken on this level of management, except for one in Hawaii. So maybe, partly, I think that the impact of DPN was on the hearing community. It made them more receptive to the idea of having a deaf superintendent. Here in New Jersey, I noticed that there was a lot of very positive support because they knew about DPN, so DPN influenced the hearing community.
After DPN, there was a sense of things being different, a new structure and power. I don't think I would be on the Board of Trustees if the students hadn't demanded and desired that there be deaf representation on the board. If not for that, I doubt there would be any reason for me to be on the board. So I'm glad I became involved. The students required this involvement, and the board itself has changed. Really, it is a different group of people. It's more of a mixture of color, more diversity.
Some say that DPN was a big factor in the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. But for sure, DPN has already raised the level of consciousness about deaf people and their rights. It pushed people in the deaf community together as a group so that they could assert themselves about their rights. So after DPN, deaf people participated actively in the passage of the ADA and the implementation of ADA.
DPN helped many deaf people all over the U.S. in many different ways. Today we have access to many new areas. In the past, our job opportunities were narrowed to the field of printing. Then there is a shift to education and rehabilitation counseling. Choices were very limited. I think that in the past 5 years, we've expanded our opportunities. There are more deaf lawyers and more deaf people in the corporate world. When I speak of the corporate world, people only think of telecommunications and relay services, but it goes much further than that.
For many years, Hispanic leaders knew, in the back of our minds, knew that we could achieve, but we lacked guts. We didn't feel connected. Then Gallaudet students protested, and it gave us more confidence as deaf people. We saw the changes and saw that we stood far behind the general deaf community.
Since DPN, the number of deaf people going into business has increased almost 10 times. When the Deaf Entrepreneur Council was established, we had only 12 members. Today, we have over 70 members. And in the entire United States, there are over 700 deaf-owned businesses.
When DPN occurred, it became an international event because it was in many different newspapers and on TV and on the radio. So deaf people saw what was happening, and they began to gain some self-confidence. They started thinking that as deaf people they could do the same things that the Americans did in their own countries. You have to realize that in many countries deaf people are frustrated and constantly struggling with the government. When they see rallies or events publicized on TV, they see that as a symbol of deaf people reaching their goals. In Sweden, you have to pay for television, and the deaf people all agreed to boycott television because of a refusal to caption television programs. The deaf people all agreed to have a boycott and refused to pay for their television licenses. The Swedish government became very nervous. That is an example of the effect of DPN.
DPN paved the way for Canada's own protest, Deaf Ontario Now, and effected change for the 250,000 deaf people living in Canada. Job opportunities in Ontario skyrocketed right after DPN. I was so surprised because we faced an economic decline, but we still see deaf people having more and more opportunities for jobs at the management level, and deaf teachers and teacher training, and in social services agencies, so many of them. For example, we have over 10 deaf vocational rehabilitation counselors. We have deaf people at management levels. We have some people involved in PR for community activities. It's growing tremendously.
DPN brought a heightened awareness and acceptance of deaf people and deaf culture. During the past 5 years, deaf achievements have been highly publicized in the media, and deaf actors and actresses are now starring in roles that probably would have only been given to hearing people a decade ago.
But we shouldn't sit back and rest on the laurels of DPN. Our 15 minutes of fame has been extended to 5 years, but as with any fad or fancy, our time could run out. What should we, deaf people, be doing to promote and ensure continued smooth travel through the inroads and crossroads called American society?
Deafness itself is a confusing disability, and it requires a lot of educating. By educating, I'm not just talking about education to the general public, the hearing society. There is one thing that I'm really concerned about, and there is not enough attention to it. The deaf community is moving right along on their issues and doing fine. However, here in the United States, we have, almost 23 million people with hearing losses, ranging from the mildest hearing loss to profound deafness, and from the use of spoken English to the use of American Sign Language. The needs are all different. The hearing losses are all different. There's not just one way, not only one way, and we need to understand that. We need to support one another. We need to support the hard of hearing, support the late deaf and adult, and support deaf people who sign in the deaf community.
I have a 95 decibel hearing loss. I think that classifies me as profoundly hard of hearing. part of the country that I am in does not have a very organized deaf group of people. And so in order to survive in business, you have to be able to accommodate the hearing population. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, it is not a major concentration of deaf people such as you have in Washington or some other parts of the country.
Well, my personal wish would be to see more and more deaf people become successful in their jobs. We need more deaf professionals, more deaf people in the field of journalism, more doctors and lawyers and teachers. We need people in that area of so-called white-collar jobs. We need more in those areas because the most important people in this country, and I'm speaking of the hearing population, are those working in white-collar jobs. If they have the chance to be exposed more to deaf people, then they will see us and understand us better. So we need more deaf people in those areas.
What I have not yet seen happen is a deaf senator or a deaf person in the House of Representatives, or even a legislator at the state legislative level, or even a councilman. This has not yet happened. We have accomplished a lot in the area of education and in the business world. We have made increasing inroads, especially with telecommunications. Now it is the government, the state, local, and national governments, including high positions, that we need to look at and where we need to make improvements.
I would like to see every person become aware of ADA, because it would make my job, or the job of anyone who is in the position of advocacy work, easier. Often I find that deaf people are completely unaware of how to initiate changes themselves. After I explain it to them, then they understand. If they had known, there would have been changes everywhere, and access to services would have been dramatically improved. Right now, many deaf people just don't know.
DPN is a thing of the past. Don't think of it as obsolete, done with, and buried. It's only the beginning. It opened a golden door. The door opened with music that flowed from a golden harp. But we must continue the fight to keep the door open. We can't sit back. Revolution itself means rapid change. Now we must educate deaf people and hearing people that it is what we want. It also means we must take some radical steps. If we don't, then what was the whole point of having DPN? We made a change to prove that deaf people can. Now let's do it. That's how I feel.
This job is a symbol of what deaf people and disabled people can achieve, and therefore I have a responsibility to behave like a symbol. DDN really changed my life. I was a quiet psychology professor and dean, very, very private life, very easy for me to commute to work at Gallaudet. Now I live here on campus. I work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Changed the way I think about myself. It changed the way I function every day. But all of the change is positive. I love my job. I love the relationship I have with people here at Gallaudet. I love to travel and meet people, especially children, because children look to me as something they can become later. It's really important that they understand they can do anything they want.
I'm not sure what I want to do yet, but I do know I want to go to a large university, not a small one. You know, I felt that deaf people couldn't do anything, but now I feel I can do anything. I can establish goals for myself and move ahead. I hope I have a good life ahead of me now.
I want to be a professional women's basketball player in Europe.
I want to become a lawyer.
Oh, I want to be a doctor. I'd like to be a businessman. Or even a mayor. Yeah, a mayor. In the city.
I'm going to be in the FBI. I want to be an Olympic gymnast. When I grow up, I want to be in the Army.
I want to be an astronaut and land on the moon.
We hope you've enjoyed today's program, and we encourage you, both deaf and hearing, to actively continue the progress that we as a nation have made together. As you have seen and heard, as individuals we are strong, but collectively we effect change, and we are giants.
In 1988, Gallaudet University students became giants and united in one voice, Deaf President Now. The movement's solidarity and power steamrolled the entire nation and flattened old traditions in a few short days. That power became a promise and the touchstone for millions of deaf people. Until next time, when Deaf Mosaic brings you more stories from around our world, I'm Gil Eastman.
And I'm Mary Lou Novitsky.
So long.